Hi, so my name is Caitlin Vaughn, and today I will be covering the absence of black men in the realm of head coaching. So, to begin, we're going to look at the numbers. So, 2 of 32 NFL head coaches are black compared to 70% of the players being black. 1 of 30 MLB managers are black compared to 7.7% of the players being black. 4 of 30 NBA head coaches are black, compared to 3/4 of the players being black, and 5 of 24 MLS head coaches are black, compared to 22% of the players being black. So when we look at the representation numbers, we see that the NFL, they are way underrepresented, since only 6.25% of head coaches are black. Looking at 6.25 compared to the 70%, you see the major difference. When we get to the MLB, um, black people are slightly underrepresented, since there are not a lot of black players to begin with. 1 of 30 MLB managers seems very small, but in the grand scheme of things, that makes up for 3.3% of all managers, compared to the 7.7% of black players. So there's about 50%, less than about half of them being there. So for every manager would be two black players, technically. When we get to the NBA, where there is the highest percentage of black players, you see only 4 of 30 NBA head coaches, which that makes for 13.3% of head coaches being black. So that is a very vast difference. And then we get to the MLS, which is actually the closest, with there being 22% of black players. And then since 5 of 24 of the head coaches are black, it's 20.8% representation. So that is the closest it goes to black men being in professional head coaching positions. And then we go on to something the book touched on, which goes on to 6 conditions for racial and ethnic diversity to for racial and ethnic diversity to exist. There we go. So one, it was when those in control recruit without bias. So a team will have a better environment if those in control decide to just recruit, not looking at skin color, not looking at ethnicity, because then it will just lead to a team being more diverse. Because of course, skin color doesn't determine whether a player will be good or not. It just boils down to their skills and their worth ethic. Going on to number two, failing to measure performance in objective terms, because using these objective terms can lead to racial bias. So it's just better to stay away from those altogether. Going on to number three, the team benefiting from the performance of athletes regardless of race and ethnicity. So when you have different players from different backgrounds stepping up and being great team players, it doesn't always seems to be like, oh, the white guy's always doing good, or oh, the black guy's always doing good. It's just everyone's doing good. It doesn't matter your race. Number four is a big one, when excellence doesn't equal an increase of power and control. So we have the whole thing, which, team captain. So it's already hard to say, like, to eliminate that, since it seems to be like the better you are, the more power you get. In the NFL, we see this when you look at the players, and they have a coaching badge on their jersey, and it'll go from 1 to 4 stars. And always, typically, the quarterback always has a coaching badge. A captain badge, regardless. Whether it's an Eli Manning, where you just have like one because you don't really talk much, but you're the quarterback, so of course you're going to have one. Or going on to a Tom Brady, where you have all four because you are that guy. So that leads to a more of a racial dominant situation, because especially in the NFL, when you have most of the quarterbacks being white anyway. So bless me. Most of the quarterbacks being white anyway. And so if you award players for doing great and you give them more power and control, especially over their own race, then it'll lead to them maybe going against the other. And that's why it's just good to get rid of that altogether. One, number five seems a little bit odd, but I'll explain it. When friendships aren't needed to secure success on the field. Basically, people say that we need to see each other's side and we need to see how the other side lives. But if you can just go on the field and you can just play as a team without having to know what this person went through, what this person is like, then you'll be able to, that'll just erase the barrier, because if it's like a white quarterback can't really trust a black wide receiver, but then when they get to talking and they get to learning that they have a lot in common, that's when they can. That's an issue. Even though it's good that they're making that connection, it should just be regardless of skin color, regardless of ethnicity, you should be able to play effectively as a team. So if you're able to reach that point, that's a really good milestone. And number six, when all athletes are controlled by executives from the majority race. So, of course, this is within all the major leagues. You have an executive office that is mostly comprised of white males, and you have, of course, in the NFL and the NBA's case, you have a predominantly black uh, players. So you have that, and so when you have those issues, it kind of reminds me of the situation with the Texans and how the owner at the time, he was reported to say that you can't let the prisoners run the prison. And so of course that looked awful because it was, well, 70% of the players are black, and of the owners in this room, about all of us are white. So how does that work? So it just wasn't a good look. And so when athletes aren't controlled by those executives, it really just opens up for better relations, because things that the NFLPA and the NBAPA can't do. And so this chart just displays the number of minority head coaches in the NFL ranging from 1990 to 2019. And so if you see right here in 2003, that's when the Rooney Rule was introduced. And at that time, there had been no more than three. And of course, going into 2006, you get seven. And just recently, 2017, 2018, we had eight. But of course, that's taken a steep drop to four, and only two of those coaches are black. And so then we're going to talk about the Rooney Rule. So starting in 2003, NFL teams with a head coach vacancy, they had to interview a candidate of color. And so this, it's called the Rooney Rule because it was spearheaded by Rooney, which was the owner of the Pittsburgh Steelers. And of course, now the Pittsburgh Steelers, they've had Mike Tomlin since 2007, I believe. And so he's one of the longest tenured head coaches in the NFL right now, and he is black, one of the four head coaches of color right now. And it was just basically, it had to do with issues such as Tony Dungy. He was the head coach for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers before he was the head coach for the Indianapolis Colts. And he was fired after having a winning season, but it wasn't up to his prior seasons. And so it just was seen as black coaches have less of a chance to continue their jobs than white coaches. And of course, this is evident today. You have like the coach of the Cincinnati Bengals right now. The Bengals actually just got their first win today, which makes them 1-10. Yet other black coaches were fired much quicker, but this coach, since he's a white male, he got the opportunity to go 1-10, and he was not axed, because people can say, well, it's their first season, but for black coaches, it was their first season and they got axed. So you can see the discrepancies in that. And then that goes into the NFL, an issue with thinking positions. And so it was thought that black males were not as smart as white males, and so they couldn't play positions such as the quarterback, such as the middle linebacker, and of course, not a head coach. And so in this, I've used three black males who have been extraordinary at their positions, of course, with Deshaun Watson, the quarterback for the Houston Texans, Ray Lewis, the previous middle linebacker for the Baltimore Ravens, and of course, right now, Mike Tomlin, which is the head coach for the Pittsburgh Steelers. And so the middle linebacker, people wonder how is that thinking, but I've had the opportunity to play MLB, and I totally get it, because basically they are the quarterback of the defense. They have to be able to read the offense. They have to scan the whole field, and so that takes a lot of quick wit. That takes a lot of intelligence. And so for Ray Lewis to be as good as he was, to be in the Hall of Fame right now, it shows that it didn't matter the color of his skin. He was still able to rise to the occasion at that. And then we have the, moving on to the NBA, we have the coaches versus the stereotypes. Because I was talking to classmates and my family about this, and I was wondering, how is the NBA technically the blackest league? and they don't have the most coaches. Like they're, you would think they would have more NBA coaches of color, yet they don't. Oh gosh, okay. And so basically, it goes from stereotypes. They were thought to be less apt to coach, they were thought to be less reliable, and ultimately, they were perceived as dumber than the white man. And so, players in the NBA, they were able to shake the stereotype of maybe they're not as athletic. And then it was like, well, yes, they are. And then it's like, well, maybe they're not as clutch. And it's like, but yes, they are. Have you seen LeBron James in these repeated NBA finals? It's like, well, maybe they aren't as smart. They can't dribble as well. And it's like, but of course they can. Steph Curry, his handles are amazing. So the only thing left was, well, coaches just can't do it. And sadly, that is a stereotype that is stuck around. And then I decided to look at the age and see if there was a correlation, and it seems there is. So the MLB was founded in 1869, which makes it 150 years old. And as I've noted, only 7.7% of the players are black. Going on to the NFL, it was founded in 1920, 100 years, and 70% of the players are black. NBA, you have is 73 years old, 75% of the players are black. The MLS, 25 years old, and 22% of the players are black. And so it's less about the players percentage and more about the coaching percentage, as we saw, um, if they correlate. So if we see in the MLB, not only are the percentage of players low, but the percentage of coaching is low. And so with there only being 3.3% of coaches being black, or managers, I should say, and then you go into the NFL and you sing 6.25%, yet compared to the 70%. So it's getting a little bit higher. Then you go to the NBA and it's 13.3%, a little bit higher. But then the MLS, with it being 20.8% compared to the 22%. And it seems like the league that is the newest also seems to be right along with representation, but yet all the older leagues, they fall off of representation. So it was as if it was climbing in the age. By the younger it got, the more represented black males were. And then we go on to baseball and it being the white man's game. So here I have Jackie Robinson, of course, and then I have Mookie Betts. And so Robinson, he was the first player to break the color barrier with the Brooklyn Dodgers at the time. And then you have Mookie Betts, which is, he's multiple times been an all-star. He's been considered for MVPs, all of that, and he plays on the Boston Red Sox. And the thing about the Red Sox is that there's actually been an issue with racial slurs being thrown out by fans, because Boston isn't the easiest place to play, especially being in the Northeast and it having a higher white population in states in the South. And it's just crazy to see that even now in this day in 2019 you still have issues with race relations to that level, because of course Jackie Robinson had to deal with it in the clubhouse, on the field he had to deal with being disrespected, and of course fans doing it. And back then of course they didn't really do much to stop it, but in Mookie's case it's like all you can do is remove the fan, give them a lifetime ban, but it's still disheartening to see that it still occurs to this day. And going on to the Dodgers, I did an analyzation of them. And the question is, are they a good example or are they an outlier? So I mentioned there's one of 30 MLB managers is black, and his name is David Rogers. He is the manager for the LA Dodgers. And the thing about Roberts is that he's not even fully black, he's black and Asian. And so a thing about the Dodgers that's kind of odd, of course, since I mentioned earlier, this man right here, Jackie Robinson, was the first to break the color barrier, and he played for the Brooklyn Dodgers, which became the LA Dodgers. And yet, in 2019, the Dodgers played a game with no black players for the first time since the color barrier had been broken. So it was a day in November, I mean, not November, I apologize, in September, and the Dodgers had a alumni game, and so they brought back all their players to play a game beforehand. And so since the Dodgers was once the preferred team of black players, since they were the first to allow black player to be on their team, they had plenty of black alumni. And when they came, they noticed on the alumni day, the game they played, they had no black players on there. The Dodgers do have notable players of color like Kenley Jansen, who was their relief pitcher, but he wasn't included in the lineup. So there were no black players in the game that played. And so a question is, does the field reflect the front office? And I would say yes and no, because of course no, because you have the one lone manager of color, but at the same time, yes, because when you have the lack of players on the field that are black, and you look in the executive office and see the lack thereof as well, it does reflect that. And so overall, I would say that the numbers for black head male coaches, for black male head coaches, they are not the largest or the highest numbers. But as you see, it's getting better with the MLS adopting more black head coaches, which recently they just had their first American born head coach, black head coach. And that was an issue they were speaking about as well, because the other four, they were black, they just weren't American born. And so they were thinking, well, it still goes down to the deep rooted racism within America, because sure, we can accept blacks from outside of America, but can we accept blacks that are homegrown? And that was a big controversy because it took so long for the head coach to become one, because he was a trusted second hand for so long, but now he had finally gotten his chance to be in the limelight. And then looking at the NBA, which is probably the most striking for me because they have such a good players association. Even their commissioner, Adam Silver, is black, yet the lack of head coaches there is ridiculous. Of course, especially with three quarters, the biggest of all the major leagues, three quarters of the players being black, and it doesn't reflect in the head office. And that's an issue. But at the same time, the NBA is making advances in other positions, with them having now more women coaches, and in giving women the opportunity to excel on a professional platform. The MLB, it's not much to say about them. It's kind of like they regressed. Actually, in the 1980s, they had the highest percentage of black players with about 18.7%, but now they fell from 7.7%. And I actually forgot to mention that um, when Jackie Robinson played, when he retired, 6.7% of players were black. And now, in the time of Mookie Betts, 7.7% are black. So, seeing only 1% raise from 1948 to 2019, that's not very encouraging. And of course, with seeing one of 30 MLB managers, that's especially not encouraging either. And the NFL is, of course, a whole nother beast with their issues, especially with the whole kneeling situation. And since there were not a lot of since there's not a lot of black executives, and it was just white executives making the decisions, then you have certain threats coming from Jerry Jones saying, no, my players are for sure they're gonna stand for the pledge, and if they don't, well, they don't need to come out the locker room. And that whole thing, it boils down to, I had the quote in here. Here we go. Those who benefit from the dominant racial ideology generally resist the change. So Jerry Jones, he benefits from the NFL head office mostly being white. So why would he want to give black players the opportunity to express themselves? Because it doesn't benefit him in any way. Public opinion doesn't mean much, I guess, especially not when money is on the line. So that goes that. And this was actually taken from the book, and I just really liked that because it really summed up the issue, especially with the stereotypes. Because if those who don't benefit from change, why would they want to adopt change at all? And so that was my presentation. I hope you'll be able to learn from this and think about it going forward. Thank you.